My name is Claire, and this is the story of how my husband thought he had already won before the game even started. It began with a name I didn't recognize, not a name whispered in the dark, not a name I found on a receipt or a hotel bill. It was a name printed in clean, professional font on an email I was never supposed to see. 2 words, A. Brennan. No first name, no context, just a subject line that read, Re. Timeline, keep this moving, and a thread my husband had accidentally left open on the laptop we shared for household bills. I almost didn't look. I had come downstairs to check our mortgage auto payment, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the kitchen table like I did every Thursday evening. The laptop was already open. My husband was upstairs on a call he'd said was work-related, the kind that had been happening every other night for the past 2 months. I told myself it was a busy season. I told myself a lot of things that year. I clicked the email without thinking. I read the first 3 lines. Then I read them again. The asset review is nearly complete. Once we have the full picture, we move to phase 2. Make sure she doesn't know until it's done. I sat very still. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of his voice through the ceiling low, unhurried, the tone of a man who had everything under control. My water glass was cold in my hand. I set it down carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what happens if you let go too fast. I closed the laptop. I went back upstairs. I slid into bed, and when my husband came in 20 minutes later and kissed my temple and said sorry, long night, I smiled and told him it was fine. It wasn't fine, but I had learned, in 7 years of marriage to Marcus, that the worst thing you could do when you were afraid was let him see it. My husband was a corporate attorney. That mattered more than people realize. He didn't think like other men, he thought like a case he was trying to win. He anticipated moves 3 steps ahead. He knew how to make everything look reasonable, legitimate, even generous, right up until the moment you realized the floor had been pulled out from under you. That was his gift. He could restructure the entire truth of a situation and present it to you with a straight face, and you would walk away thinking you had misunderstood everything. I had spent 7 years being misunderstood. The next morning, I waited until he left for the office, and then I sat back down at that laptop and read every email in the thread. It went back 4 months. 4 months of correspondence between my husband and A. Brennan, whoever that was about something called a controlled asset transition. Our joint investments. His partnership stake, a property we owned in Scottsdale that I had signed the original deed on 6 years ago. Everything was being quietly restructured, transferred, repositioned into accounts and entities I had never heard of. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to leave me with nothing. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because it wasn't what I expected. I thought I would cry. I thought I would feel the floor give way beneath me. Instead, I felt something go very quiet and very cold in my chest, the kind of cold that isn't panic, that isn't grief. It was clarity. Pure, sharp, almost surgical clarity. He had 4 months on me. That meant I had no time to waste. I didn't confront him. I didn't change my behavior by a single degree. That evening I made dinner, poured wine, asked about his day. He talked for 20 minutes about a deposition that had gone sideways, and I listened and nodded and refilled his glass. At no point did his eyes flicker with anything resembling guilt. He was that good. But then, so was I, he just didn't know it yet. The following morning I called my college roommate, Diane, who had become a family law attorney in Seattle. I hadn't spoken to her in 8 months. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything, not in a shaking, tearful rush I had done my crying alone. In the shower that morning, for exactly 4 minutes but clearly, methodically, the way I'd spent the night rehearsing it. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the other end. "How long do you think he's been planning this?" she asked. "At least 4 months," I said. "Maybe longer. Then we need to move faster than he thinks you can." She paused. "Claire, the most important thing right now is that you don't sign anything. Not a form, not a document, not even something that looks routine. Do you understand me?" I understood her. I also understood something she didn't yet know. 3 days after I found that email, my husband sat across from me at breakfast and slid a folder across the table. He smiled the way he always smiled when he was managing a situation, warm, patient, slightly condescending. "I've been thinking about simplifying our financials," he said. "The accountant suggested we consolidate some accounts for tax efficiency. I just need your signature on a few things." I picked up the folder. I opened it. I scanned the first page, then the second, keeping my face perfectly neutral, even though every line confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about tax efficiency. This was the first move of phase 2. I closed the folder. I set it back on the table. I'll need to read through everything carefully, I said. You know me, I like to understand what I'm signing. He didn't blink. Of course, he said. No rush. But his thumb was pressing against the side of his coffee mug in the small, involuntary way it always did when something wasn't going the way he'd planned. I noticed. I'd been noticing things about Marcus for 7 years. The difference now was that I was finally using what I saw. That same afternoon I met with Diane, who had driven down from Seattle and booked a hotel. We sat in her room with the curtains drawn, and 2 laptops open between us. And for the next 3 hours we built a picture of exactly what my husband had been doing. It was worse than I'd thought. The Scottsdale property had already been transferred into an LLC one I was not listed on 9 weeks earlier. 2 of our joint investment accounts had been gradually drained into accounts I didn't have access to. The timeline matched the email thread almost exactly. He's thorough, Diane said, and there was a grudging professional respect in her voice that, under different circumstances, might have been funny. He's also not done, I said. He still needs my signature on the joint brokerage account and the pension transfer, which means he still needs me cooperative. Diane looked at me. How long can you maintain that? As long as it takes, I told her. What I did over the following 2 weeks, I did quietly and completely legally. Diane walked me through every step. I separated my personal savings, the money I had earned from my own freelance consulting work, money I had always kept distinct from our household finances, and moved it into a trust in my name alone, established before any divorce proceedings began. I contacted the brokerage directly to flag that no transfers should be authorized without my explicit verbal confirmation. I pulled the original deed records on the Scottsdale property and began building documentation of my contribution to that purchase. And I found out who A. Brennan was. It took 4 days and a private investigator Diane recommended. Andrew Brennan was not a financial advisor or an accountant. He was a disbarred attorney, disbarred 3 years earlier in California for falsifying documents in an estate dispute, who now operated what he called a private asset consulting business out of a suite in downtown Portland. He had worked with Marcus's firm once, years ago, on a case involving offshore restructuring. They had kept in touch. Marcus hadn't hired a lover. He had hired a criminal. I remember sitting in Diane's hotel room reading that report and feeling the last piece click into place. This was no longer just a divorce. This was fraud. Potentially criminal fraud. And my husband, the man who kissed my temple every night and told me not to worry about long calls, who refilled his own coffee cup without ever asking if I wanted more, had been orchestrating it from our kitchen table. He told me he wanted to separate on a Tuesday morning. He said it the way he said everything important matter-of-factly, as though he were informing me of a scheduling change. He had come downstairs in his work shirt, already half-dressed, and sat across from me and said, "I think we've both known for a while that this isn't working." He said it gently, reasonably, the way you'd expect a man to say it who believed he was about to walk out with everything and leave you with very little recourse. I looked at him for a long moment. "You've been planning this," I said. Something moved across his face, not guilt. Exactly. More like recalibration. "I've been thinking about it for a while," he said. "I think it's the right move for both of us." I nodded slowly. Then I said the 5 words that changed everything. "I've already moved my assets." The recalibration stopped. For the first time in 7 years, I watched Marcus genuinely not know what to say. His expression didn't collapse. He was too controlled for that. But there was a stillness in him that I had never seen before. The stillness of a man who has just realized the board looks nothing like he thought it did. "What does that mean?" he said. His voice was even, but his jaw was tight. "It means exactly what it sounds like," I said. I picked up my coffee and stood up. "Your attorney can contact mine." He filed 3 days later. The documents arrived on a Friday. Diane was already in Seattle, but I called her before I even opened the envelope. She told me what to expect, and she was right. Marcus was claiming 50% of every shared asset, including the Scottsdale property, including the joint brokerage account, including a pension contribution I had made years before we were married. He was also requesting spousal support, on the basis that I had disrupted the marital financial structure by moving assets prior to filing. Diane laughed, briefly and without humor, when I read her that last part. "He's going to say you hid assets," she said. "Get ready for that." It came sooner than I expected. Within 2 weeks of the filing, I started getting calls from mutual friends careful. Probing calls. The kind where people ask how you're doing while actually telling you what they've heard. One of my closest friends from our neighborhood, a woman I had known for 4 years, called me to say, gently, that she'd heard I had been moving money around before the separation and that some people were saying it didn't look right. I thanked her for telling me. I hung up, and I sat with it for exactly 60 seconds. Then I called Diane. He was running a narrative. He had gotten ahead of the legal story by poisoning the social one, framing me as someone who had acted deceptively, strategically, maybe even illegally, before he could protect himself. It was elegant, in the way that all of Marcus's moves were elegant. He was trying to make me the aggressor, so that when the case went to mediation, or before a judge, the picture of me was already complicated. He's doing this, Diane said, because he's rattled. A man who thinks he's winning doesn't need to do this. I held on to that. I held on to it through the next 2 weeks, which were the hardest not because of the legal pressure, but because of the particular loneliness of being publicly misrepresented by someone who used to know you better than anyone. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled at people in the grocery store. At night, I went over documents with Diane until 11 p.m., and then I poured myself 1 glass of wine and stood at my kitchen window and looked at the city and reminded myself that what felt like loss was actually just the last wall coming down. Then Marcus made his fatal mistake. Diane called me on a Wednesday morning, her voice sharp in a way that immediately cut through my sleep. He's filed a motion for a full forensic audit of your accounts, she said. He's claiming you mismanaged joint funds and owes him a settlement. I set up. On what grounds? He submitted documentation, she said. Transaction records showing funds transferred out of joint accounts going back 8 months. Claire, these records are not real. I went very still. He fabricated them? Andrew Brennan fabricated them, she said. And they're good, whoever did this knew what they were doing. But I had my forensic accountant look at them last night, and she found something. A pause. 3 of the account numbers listed in those transfers, the accounts don't exist. They were never opened. The transactions reference accounts that weren't established until after the dates listed on the transfers. I closed my eyes. That was it. That was the thread that unraveled everything. He had overplayed it. He and Andrew Brennan had built a case out of documents they had manufactured. And in their care to make those documents look comprehensive, they had made a mistake that no amount of legal smoothness could undo. You cannot have a transaction on an account that didn't exist yet. The timestamps were impossible, and impossible timestamps were provable. I want to go on the offense, I told Diane. I don't just want to defend against this. I want to go after both of them. She didn't hesitate. I was hoping you'd say that. We spent the next 10 days building our counter case. Our forensic accountant documented every falsified timestamp. We pulled Andrew Brennan's prior disbarment records. Diane filed a motion to dismiss the audit request on grounds of fraudulent evidence and simultaneously filed for sanctions against Marcus for submitting falsified documents to the court. She also referred the matter to the State Bar Association, noting that a licensed attorney, my husband, had knowingly participated in the fabrication of legal evidence. The hearing was on a Thursday. I wore gray. I sat beside Diane and I kept my hands flat on the table in front of me, and I did not look at Marcus more than twice. His attorney went first, presenting the audit motion with the kind of well-practiced confidence that Marcus's world ran on. I watched his attorney, a man I had met at firm parties, who had shaken my hand and called me Claire, and eaten the appetizers I'd arranged, lay out a case built entirely on documents that didn't reflect anything that had ever actually happened. Then Diane stood up. She was quiet, and she was precise, and she was devastating. She walked the judge through the account numbers, the timestamps, the impossibility of the transactions as documented. She placed the forensic report in front of the judge. She noted Andrew Brennan's prior disbarment. She noted the documented correspondence between Brennan and my husband going back over 4 months, establishing a pattern of coordinated asset concealment. She requested dismissal with prejudice, full legal costs awarded to me, and she referred the matter, formally and on the record, to the State Bar for investigation into professional misconduct. Marcus's attorney asked for a recess. When they came back, he stood and said, in the flat voice of a man delivering bad news to a client who had brought it entirely on himself, Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw the audit motion. The judge didn't grant the withdrawal without comment. Given the nature of the documentation submitted, the judge said, and the findings of the forensic review, The court is referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for further investigation. The motion is dismissed. All legal costs are awarded to the respondent. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps in the thin morning sun, and Diane squeezed my arm and said, "It's not over, but the worst is." She was right, and she was also slightly wrong, because 2 months later the state bar completed its review, and Marcus was suspended from practice pending a full disciplinary hearing. Andrew Brennan, already disbarred once, faced criminal charges for document falsification. The settlement came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Diane slid the papers across her desk, and I read every page even though I already knew what they said. Marcus received nothing. Not the Scottsdale property. Not the brokerage account. Not $1 of spousal support. His financial claims were dismissed entirely. His reputation in the legal community he had spent 15 years building was in ruins. I signed the last page. I put the pen down. "How do you feel?" Diane asked. I thought about it honestly. "Like I can breathe again," I said. That night my sister drove up from Portland, and we sat on my apartment floor and ordered Thai food and opened a bottle of wine. I had been saving for something, but couldn't remember what. We talked until past midnight about our parents, about old vacations, about things that had nothing to do with any of this. At some point, she looked at me and said, "You know what I kept thinking the whole time? That he picked the wrong one." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. He did pick the wrong one. Not because I'm extraordinary, not because I had some talent for strategy that other women don't have, but because I paid attention, because I didn't panic when I was afraid, because I chose to move quietly instead of react loudly, to build a case instead of make a scene, to let the truth be the weapon instead of my emotions. Marcus thought he knew me. He knew the version of me that deferred to his expertise, that trusted his management of our finances, that smiled at firm dinners and thanked his colleagues, and never pushed back too hard. He knew 7 years of careful self-erasure. He had no idea who I was underneath it. I don't know. I stood on my apartment balcony the night after the settlement, looking out at the lights of the city, and I thought about the woman who had sat at that kitchen table and read those 3 lines on an open laptop, "Make sure she doesn't know until it's done," and felt the floor tilt beneath her. She didn't fall. She steadied herself, and then she did the one thing nobody expected her to do. She went to work. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. Unknown number. I picked it up, looked at it once, and set it back down without answering. Then I went inside, opened my laptop, and started writing a proposal for a new client. A new chapter. Mine. Before I go, I want to leave you with something real. If you are in a situation right now where something feels off in your finances, in your marriage, in the way someone talks to you when they think you're not paying close attention, please, trust that feeling. Don't dismiss it. Don't let anyone tell you you're being dramatic or paranoid or difficult for asking questions. Your instincts exist for a reason. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to wait until everything falls apart to start protecting yourself. The moment I stopped waiting for proof that I could show him and started building proof I could show a judge, everything changed. You are not behind. You are not too late. And if someone has spent months trying to ensure you don't suspect anything yet, let me tell you something from the other side of it. The best revenge isn't anger, it's preparation. It's showing up in that courtroom with documentation they didn't know you had, watching their attorney ask for a recess, and sitting there in the quiet knowing that you moved first. They underestimated you. Let that be the last mistake they ever make in your direction. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to quietly protect yourself from someone who thought they already had you figured out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story hit something real for you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. There's so much more to come. Stay sharp, stay calm, and never ever let anyone convince you that the ground belongs to them.